Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise for a point of personal privilege.
The delegate has the floor.
As they say, and now for something completely different. Mr. Speaker, if I can get my screen back up here. There we are. Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen of the House, 49 years ago this week, a man named Henry Smolinski made history. Mr. Smolinski was an inventor and an aviation pioneer, and his dream was to bring aviation to the masses. And so he and his partners founded Advanced Vehicle Engineering, AVE, in California. And they had a great idea. Let's take an inexpensive car and attach enough aircraft parts to it to make it fly. Now, you could drive to the airport and then fly away. And when you landed, you could just take the wings off and then drive to your final destination. Mr. Smolinski and his team took the back of a Cessna Skymaster and then bolted it to a Ford Pinto. The results, they said, would be affordable aviation, starting at about $18,000. And adjusted for inflation, that's about $120,000 today. Now, it's still a lot, but it's not completely out of reach for everybody. Now, there were doubters. They said that the concept, while it was really good on paper, had some major flaws. The car-plane combo was just too heavy. The welds weren't strong enough. The connection between the car and the wings was too weak. But Mr. Smolinski persevered. He didn't listen to the doubters who said that his dream was impractical. And so, on September 11th, 1973, the AVE Mizar took off for the first time with Mr. Smolinski at the controls of his creation and one passenger on board. And not long after takeoff, the right wing support, which was held to the car door with sheet metal screws, detached, and the wing buckled, and the Ford Pinto fell thousands of feet to the ground, and Mr. Smolinski and his passengers were both killed in the crash. You see, Mr. Speaker, not all good ideas on paper translate really well to the real world. Big dreams can fail spectacularly because the devil lives in the details. And that's exactly the situation with the new rules that are coming from the California Air Resources Board regarding electric cars. For the moment, set aside the fact that Virginians have no voice in these rules. Set aside the fact that there is virtually no charging infrastructure outside of Northern Virginia, and that most of these cars can't go much more than 200 miles without a break of an hour or more. Set aside the fact that they're hugely expensive and that they need battery replacements that cost 5 figures in the middle of their lives that can turn the car into a total financial loss. Let's look for a moment at what happens when those rules come into effect in 2024. First, new sales must be 35% electric by 2026. That is a massive transition. Electric vehicle sales in Virginia right now account for about 2% of new car sales. But let's assume somehow that happens, and somehow Virginians come up with the money to buy these more expensive new electric cars. What does this mean for everyday Virginia families? Well, it means that their lives are about to get a lot more expensive. Anyone who hasn't bought an electronic vehicle will see the value of their gas-powered car climb. And anybody who got a car tax bill this year knows what happens when the demand for used cars goes up dramatically in a short period of time. With the pipeline of used gasoline-powered cars slowly drying up, cars that, won't need a $16,000 battery replacement, the value of used cars will go up and up and up. And people who couldn't afford an electric car will now struggle to buy a used gasoline-powered car. But where will all these cars charge? You see, as of June, there were a total of 832 fast charging stations that could charge a car in less than an hour in all of Virginia. Now, when was the last time you took an hour to buy gas? Even the slow chargers are hard to find. Building them out is going to be expensive, and somebody will have to pay for that. And usually that means electric ratepayers will pick up the tab. And that's to say nothing of the cost of building the generation and transmission required to charge cars at home and businesses. Assuming that a home's electrical system has the capacity to charge at level 2, a plug like the kind you'd use for an electric oven, it can consume anywhere between 7 and 10 kilowatts. That's like running your oven and your dryer together. That's not a modest amount of power. Now, multiply that by every home in your neighborhood. That's an awful lot of base load connected to the grid every single day. But let's say we work out that problem and that people buy the expensive new cars and then they pay for the 5-figure battery replacements and pay to refit their homes with more electrical capacity and pay the higher power bills that come from the infrastructure build out. Well, these cars still don't have the range to handle a long family trip in a reasonable amount of time. Now, let's say that a family wants to drive their child from Richmond to one of the many colleges in the Lynchburg area. Now, they can't make it in one charge, so instead of 3 hours, it's going to take now 4 because you got to have an extra hour to charge. And Mr. Speaker, there's a reason that the majority of EVs in Virginia are in Fairfax County. They're great for around town, but once you get into any sort of distance, they just aren't a matter of adequate technology. Now, I'm not against people buying EVs if they want them, Mr. Speaker, and I'm not even against helping to build out the charging system. But these mandatory CARB rules are just like Mr. Smolinski's Pinto airplane. They look maybe pretty good on paper, but they fall completely apart in the real world. And unfortunately, it's families that are going to have to pay the price. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.